Retina I, type 010. Post-war camera, probably made about 1946, 1947, something like that. This one, it's been here before. In fact, it's been here on more than one occasion over the years. It's got a problem, and the stated problem is that the frame spacing is a little bit random, and as a result you don't seem to get as many exposures as you'd expect. If you run out of film earlier and you've got lots of spacing between your frames. I thought that's a little bit odd, so I better check on it. So the first thing I did was I put a test film in the back, wound and advanced via the shutter, etc. And it seemed to wind and stop reliably. The frame counter seemed to turn reliably, and I got to the end of the film. The frame counter didn't seem to have counted enough frames though, a bit strange. So then I decided, well, I'm going to have to find out exactly how much film's being moved. So what I did was I took the back off the camera, got into my parts stash and machined out a type 010 camera back, so that I can get to the edge of the frame on both sides. I left the pressure plate in there so that the film is held correctly, that it's been held over the roller, and so there was no likelihood of slipping going past the sprocket. And what did I discover? Well, the numbers were pretty random. I think I've got frame lengths there from about 43mm through to 55mm of film being towed through with each cycle of the film advance. Now that's a little bit strange. So something is certainly going on. And what should it be? It should be around about 38mm, give or take a bit. 39mm would probably be better with a camera of this sort, because the metering of the film is done by counting the movement of the sprocket shaft. So it's counting sprocket holes, but the actual stopping of the film advance is done once this triggers the action of the film advance and locks the film advance knob. So there's always going to be some discrepancy there, because this doesn't lock the film, this locks the film. Now inevitably when any lever drops into place to lock something else, it's usually a pawl dropping into a ratchet, it can only drop into an individual tooth. It can't drop in between teeth and stop anything. So there's always going to be some variability in the order of the spacing of the teeth that the ratchet drops into. Given that, a spacing of between 38 and 39 would be very good. Even as much as 40 between frames would be quite good, because it means that there'd be an error for margin and you're less likely to end up with overlapping frames. If it was designed to be extremely neat and simply move the 8 sprocket holes each time, potentially you would get some overrun on one shot and perhaps no overrun on the next shot, and so the frames would overlap. It would only be the very edge of the film, but that's an annoyance we can do without when we spend so much time carefully composing our shots and hopefully not cutting off aunties' heads and feet. Right, so this thing, I'm going to have to be into this, open up the top, put a film back in it and study closely to see what's happening and what's not happening. Well, I think we have a winner. If I turn the sprocket wheel here, let's just cock and fire the shutter. If I turn the sprocket here with my finger, you'll see that it moves the wheel on the top. Bit of play in that, I notice. It looks like it might be shy a washer. It's not disconnecting from the gear in any way. What happens when we reach the end of the stop? Well, as you can see, I'm turning the sprocket, the wheel is no longer turning. So it's possible for the wheel to stay still and for the sprocket to move. Now this has a spring, if you like here, a leaf spring, a dish-shaped spring that holds those two components together so that the you'd say it's like a clutch for all practical purposes. But in this case, it's slipping. The clutch is slipping. And so it means that the film advance here could easily be advancing more film than the rotation of the wheel here would lead you to believe. So it's definitely a problem with this shaft, and I will have to dismantle this film advance mechanism, and I'll probably replace that shaft, I think, with one from my parts camera, and then test and see what sort of result I'll get after that. Well, looking at this shaft here, the washer is present at the top, so it doesn't look like it's missing anything there. Now this shaft's held in with two screws that go through to the roller. And that one seems to be playing hard to get. Now we're away. Tiny grub screws, very easily lost. Let's take that screw out so I don't lose it. And the shaft should slide out. Just recover those parts. And this is the offending piece. And that is simply too loose. Now that's riveted down at the top. Quite possibly riveting this down a bit harder would solve that problem. But of course I'm not particularly enthusiastic to do that, given that this camera's got to fly back across the planet again. I'll just go and find one of these. Well, I've identified a suitable organ donor. That's firm. I can't get that thing to slip. So this one looks like a good donor. So let's recover that shaft. Now it's worth noting that on some of these cameras, the sprocket wheel here that's connected with a tiny grub screw, instead of the grub screw dropping into a little neat machined hole in the shaft, effectively locking those two together, on some cameras they use a larger grub screw and it bears just against the plain shank. It's got no fixed location, no firm locating hole, and so you can get slippage there. That's certainly not the case here. So this piece, we'll put this in there, my customer's camera, put it back together, and I will put the film in there and check to see that the action is moving as it should. Alright, I've got these pieces placed back in position. Now lining up the holes in that shaft to get the screws in them is always a bit tricky. Now what I normally do is I just expose the hole by sliding this roller up to the top of its position. So I've got the hole pointing straight up and down. And now I know where I need to put the screw in the sprocket at the top here. And that led straight into that hole without any problem at all. Of course, now that I can see the position of that screw, I'll know that the hole on the bottom shaft here will be pointing straight up when that screw is straight up. So I can put the screw in the bottom hole. Yeah, that's just let in. And that, I think, will do the job. So all I need to do now is reassemble things and check to see how much film is drawn through. And the magic number we're looking for is something like 8 perforations, which is around 38 millimeters. Right, I have a film loaded and I'm going to mark the position at the beginning of the first frame. The second. Third, and so forth until I've got to the end of the film, and then we'll take the film out and I'll measure it. Well, I did get a full 24 frames there, so I'm fairly confident that it's winding the correct amount this time. So I don't think I'll get another exposure. Well, it depends how mean I was winding the film on. Let's have a look. Yeah, looks like I might. That was certainly it. Okay, so I'll rewind this film and then measure up and see what sort of spacing I get between the frames. Well, I've checked the spacing here, and in every case I'm getting between 39 and 40 millimeters between the frames. Now, as long as it never falls below 36, we're never going to get an overlap. But that would leave a decent space at each end, basically. It'd leave you 2 millimeters clearance at each end, which is good spacing. I would consider that more than adequate. So the most important thing is that they are regular. And if I do a sprocket count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's 8 sprocket holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so it's moving pretty much 8 sprocket holes each time. And that's as neat as we could possibly get it, I think. So that's the answer to that particular problem. This camera, it was all down to this shaft and the gear at the top, which is supposed to be not locked solid. It's supposed to have, that acts as a clutch, but in this case the clutch slips. So that was the problem, and now it's been resolved simply by swapping it apart from another camera. Now, why did the clutch start slipping? Well, wear and tear is obviously a possibility. It may well be that it was never particularly well riveted at the beginning of its life. That's also a possibility. It may be that when it was assembled absolutely dry with clean mating surfaces, and that gave it a certain amount of friction, and that as time has gone on, lubricants have found their way in there, something particularly slippery that has caused this to slip. It's also possible that the gear was under some force running along the length of the shaft, and so effectively stretched it up against that clutch, and that has loosened things by, you know, straining that dish spring arrangement. But whatever it was, I think that was the answer. And now I can put this camera's proper back on, because it's not going to be much good for photography with a little viewing hole like that from the back. And that can go back to its owner. Thanks for watching.